Welcome to our submitters this morning. A special thank you, to Councillor Ruddenclaw for the decorations this morning. Margie was in here quite early to significant loud music and worked on this. So it is a year to be jolly, and it is good to finish on a note like this after such a long year. And a big thank you to everybody. A special mention to Matt in regards to his cardigan. It's rather lovely. And we'll move on with our meeting for 16th of December. First matter is our apologies. I need to depart here at 5 to 11 and I should be back by about 11:45. So in the interim, Deputy Mayor Kramer will take the meeting. I'm happy to move that. Yep. Is there a seconder? Councillor Ruddenclaw. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Leave of absence. There are no requests for leave of absence that I'm aware of for the meetings for 2021. Are there any conflicts of interest in regards to the matters that we'll be hearing today? Councillor Keast. The
report.
Oh yes, yep, absolutely.
I'm the same.
I move we receive those. Oh no, don't need to move. Oh, Councillor Kramer?
Milford Community Trust.
Yep.
I'm also with the...
Yep, sorry I got that, Councillor Duffy, yep. So we've got Councillor Keast and Councillor Duffy in regards to the same matter and Councillor Kramer in regards to one other matter. Are there any others? That's it. Okay, so public forum, we have Wendy and Tom Holder here who are submitting in regards to submission number 14 on page 59 of the agenda. Welcome to come forward. And there is one hat left. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Wendy.
Right, I'm just going to read my submission because it's easier. There's copies of it coming. Yep, copies of it as we go. So the first part of the submission is pretty similar to what I actually wrote in my written submission, because this is the second time we've presented here for the same proposition of putting Patients Bay into the urban rating zone. So I just want to say that we object to this. We have no street lighting. We have 5 lamp posts, one at the entrance of Patients Bay subdivision, one at the end of each cul-de-sac, but no street lighting. Footpaths, we have no footpaths. There's one around the first house into Patients Bay, around Dave McDonald's house, but there's no other footpaths. All other properties are without footpaths, and access for prams, etc., is the road itself. Children also walk on the road to catch the bus at the corner. There's been no change in that since I put the 2008 review, but I think it was 2015 that we last spoke about it. There is no connectability to stormwater, as we found out when the neighbour attempted to subdivide recently. The only stormwater drains are to drain the road. There's no mowing of berms by the council. They've never mowed the berms. They've always been done by the residents themselves. And the place looks neat and tidy because the residents look after it. There's no lawn mowing at all. And the road, I want to bring this up because I did put in a complaint to the council last year or early this year that the road is filled with lichen. It's disrupting the surface of the road. We've already approached the council and nothing has been done. And the Milford Road boundary with our property also is not maintained by the council. There's no weed control, so we have to do the spraying of the broom ourselves. I've added on there that I know sometimes this doesn't come into urban rating, but we pay a full water rate for trickle water supply, so we all have to have our own water tanks and catch our own water. And there's no sewage provision to Patients Bay at all. We all have our own septic fields. So basically nothing has changed since we submitted last time. We're still rural residential or rural. there was a couple of other things I wanted to mention, and that was looking at the maps. I presume you've all seen the map. Patients Bay has no connectivity to the Te Anau township at all. Indeed, there are several large fields, sewage ponds and the Upakaroa River separating the two areas. It is noted there is no proposal by the council to include those areas into urban zoning, though they are between Patients Bay and Te Anau settlement. Patients Bay is covered by covenants attached to each title. These covenants prevent any further housing development other than what is provided for within the building platforms of each title. Each title is clearly rural lifestyle, ranging from 0.66 of a hectare to 2.9 hectares. Properties have sheep, cattle, horses, chickens, bees and are clearly rural. The only way to amend the covenants is for property owners to agree to a change, and that would require all property owners or by a High Court order. So there can be no further development there. Original plans for Patients Bay is provided by the Southern District Council, quote, further subdivision of the allotments is not permitted so as to maintain the open nature of the area and because it is not the intention to provide local body services in the form of water or sewage. It also goes on to state parking and signage will be for rural zoning. And in a recent consent application for subdivision, Ms Green, the Southern District Council's planner, is quoted as saying, in regard to the subdivision at Patients Bay, needs to be considered in the context of the area, which I consider is modified to a rural residential nature due to existing dwellings and landscape plantings, rather than vast areas of open rural space. Patients Bay is not a township, but it is a settlement for rural residential development. Note, no subdivision went ahead due to the covenants on the property. The only reason we can see for the council to again try to include Patients Bay into urban zoning is money gathering and the rates collection. Most of Patients Bay residents are pensioners or due to retire, and the Southern District Council rates continue to rise. We object to Patients Bay inclusion into the urban zoning as we do not receive the urban amenities. We are clearly separated from the township. There is land between Te Anau and Patient Bay that is not proposed for urban zoning. We are clearly rural residential as reported by council planners themselves. We are bound by covenants preventing further development, and the road is not being maintained by the Southern District Council. We are prepared to hear the reason you as a council think we are urban, as there has been no change to our area since the last attempt to urbanise us. Thanks.
Thank you. So I've just got one question in regards to the road. You mentioned the road as you turn in not being looked after by council. You're talking
road.
about the state highway.
No, I'm talking about the Patients Bay Road.
Right, from the gate and from the
yeah,
gateway.
from the entrance in.
Thank you. Are there any questions from councillors to our submitters? Councillor Ford.
Thank you. I'm curious about the covenant reason. Why is it got a covenant?
Because it was privately developed. I can't remember which year.
They're quite strict with covenants.
I've got a copy of the covenants that state that it can't be further developed.
Yeah.
And they go on each title, but this is the part that says there can be no further dwellings. So you're not allowed to erect or allow to be erected any building other than one family dwelling, house and garages, carports and such other buildings as would normally be apparent thereto, or erect any dwelling outside the building envelopes shown on the deposited plan in 14687.
So it's meant to be a spacious type development.
Yes.
That's right.
So somebody has reasoning in that.
Well, it actually came from the council itself when the private developer was developing it. They said that this is from the council's policy. Further subdivision of the allotments is not permitted so as to maintain the open nature of the area, and because it is not the intention to provide local body services in the form of water and sewage. The parking zone's rural and the signs are rural. That's from your own plan.
Councillor Douglas.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. So just following up on your question about the road, obviously we're familiar with the State Highway, and then there's the road going into Patients Bay. Are you claiming that that road which I would imagine is a council road, is not being maintained by council.
Well, I put in a request, I think it was at the beginning of this year, end of last year, beginning of this year, because the lichen has covered the whole tarseel
Right,
of
from the,
road.
about probably 2 metres out from each gutter,
Yeah.
and it's eating into it, but no one seems to be coming and doing anything about it, and for what reason, I don't know. But
So, through your worship, did you consider putting in an RFS?
we did, yeah. We put a request in with the
Request.
council,
Yeah,
with the roading thing from, on the computer, didn't you?
yeah,
which we can follow up.
yeah.
I'm sure Mr Russell's making notes in the background.
They may have seen my name and not read it because I have been putting in quite a few from our road at Brinksholm as well.
Councillor Menzies.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question of clarification, really, because you're clear about the covenant not allowing subdivision, but you talked about the neighbour subdividing. Are they outside of the Patience Bay
The neighbour-
area, or were they testing the covenants?
No, you can subdivide, but
But
you
you can't
cannot build on
build.
anything. They
Ah,
subdivide a
right.
section off, and we took them to the Environment Court, and that's as far as it went.
Right,
And they found that they could not put a house on it.
right.
They didn't go ahead with it. They've let it lapse, and they've sold their property and moved on,
Right,
because they spent a lot of money in subdividing it and surveying and council meeting and everything like that, and then found, unless they had everyone's signature to put a dwelling on that property, that was not going to happen. So they moved on.
The people bought places in Patience Bay because they want rural lifestyle
Yeah.
blocks.
yes.
Yeah.
And we come from a farm, and that's why we went there for. We don't want to be houses 2 feet from us, so, you know.
And on
We
the
like the outlook. We don't like the fact there's no street lighting. You don't have to. You can look out at the lake and not see a dirty great big light in front of you. So
I presume you've all seen the map, but on the map you can clearly see that this is Te Anau Township, and then they've done a wee bit out here, not the areas in between.
Okay, no, thank you for that clarification. I was just wondering about the subdivision.
Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. So, it doesn't sound like you have many services. You've got road and water, reticulated water through here. Is that right?
We have
we've got a
trickle feed, yeah.
trickle feed we have where you can put it into your tank. It'll
And then pump it from
we've
the
got so
tap.
many. I can't remember how much we get, but it's.
I think
We
it's
pay full
1.4.
rates, full water rates. That used to be half, but then, in the council's wisdom, they decided to charge us full rates. But, so just for the same fee. So
Okay, so water, road, some street lights.
Well, they're not really street lights, they're fancy lamp posts at the entrance
the-
of Patience Bay and
at
at the end of each cul-de-sac.
circle piece.
There's 3 cul-de-sacs.
Okay. Rubbish collection, is it?
There's rubbish collection, yes.
Is there any other services that are in those?
As in,
Oh, we've got electricity.
I think that's every, because there's 3 different classifications that can be utilised. The semi-rural, really asking. Because it doesn't sound like it's quite urban, does it?
No, we're not. That's where we'll do in our in the deliberations later on today. Is go through all those points, and you've asked some relevant questions of the submitters.
Okay.
Councillor Duffy.
So what size basically are most of the sections?
Most of them are about 2 hectares. There is one that's 0.66 and there's one that's 2.9 hectares.
ours is 2.55. Ours is the 3rd biggest. And one was
5 or 6, yeah, 5 or 6 acres.
basically farmland.
Any further questions from
No.
the submitters? Okay, I thank you for your submission. We will deliberate hopefully later today, and somebody will come back to you with that result as soon as possible. You are the only 2 submitters to come in today, but don't be frightened by that because we have had a number of other submitters as well. So
There was one other thing I'd like to say is that when I went to make my submission, the Survey Monkey thing didn't work.
Yeah.
So some people may have tried to submit and I know there was one other person in Patients Bay who was having difficulty submitting.
Certainly pick that up on your last page of your
Yeah.
submission.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a great holiday break.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll continue with the meeting. Item 5, no extraordinary or urgent items. Confirmation of the minutes of the 18th of November. I was here and I'm happy to move that. Is there a seconder, please, in regards to that? Councillor Fraser, did you look at me then? Yes, Councillor Fraser. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. So
You're going to skip that.
we're going to skip item 7.1 and go direct to 7.2, which is page 233 of the agenda. It's the risk management update. Thank you, Robin.
Good morning, Your Worship and Councillors. As you'll be aware, this report is to provide Council a quarterly risk management update. The report gives information on Council's corporate and strategic risks that have a risk threshold of high or very high without any new mitigations in place. The risk register is provided as attachment A with this report, and it includes ELT's updates for this quarter. A couple of things to note for this quarter are that ELT have assessed 2 of the risks on the register as having a status of worsening. The risks assessed as worsening are risk 9, which is about overcommitment and failing to deliver the agreed work program, and also risk 10, which is about the growth and demand model, making it hard to fund new infrastructure. In relation to risk 10, which is about the growth and demand model, ELT believe that Council continues to miss out on funding opportunities, and ELT felt this was possibly due to there being a lack of strategy supporting the approach proposed, the lack of shovel-ready projects, and Council's relatively strong financial position. In relation to risk 10, which is about financial conservatism impeding progress towards strategic objectives, this quarter ELT lowered the status of the risk from improving to static, as it identified that affordability continues to be a key factor when making decisions. A number of other updates are also included on the register for Council's information. As we discussed with the Finance and Assurance Committee yesterday, this quarter ELT also considered 2 new emerging risks. These were cybersecurity and the future role and function of local government. ELT determined that cybersecurity should be included as one of Council's strategic and corporate risks, and it now sits as Council's 12th highest risk. It was felt that in relation to the future role and function of local government, ELT felt this was already encompassed within other risks on the register. So when the Finance and Assurance Committee considered the risk register at its meeting yesterday, it discussed a number of issues. Members of the committee were keen for staff to closely monitor risk 3, which is about infrastructure being fit to withstand climate change, and they're also keen for staff to closely monitor risk 5, which is about a natural biosecurity event impacting the well-being of the district. A member of the committee also noted that the risk register raised capacity and resource issues, and they were keen to receive a bit more information about these gaps within the organisation. The committee had a good discussion about risk 9, which was the risk of failing to deliver the agreed work program, and they had a good discussion about the future role of local government. For Council's information, staff had scheduled to have a workshop on risk 2 yesterday with the Finance and Assurance Committee, but the committee ran out of time, so staff will reschedule this workshop for in the new year. The recommendations relating to this report are on page 234 of the agenda, and ELT, Michelle and I are happy to answer any questions you may have about the risk register for this quarter.
Thank you very much for that report and that summary. Are there any questions of this? Councillor Owen.
Yeah, just in relation to risk 3 with the infrastructure not fit for purpose to withstand climate change, it's good to see that that's acknowledged in there, but I just wonder about the justification behind it only being possible in terms of likelihood and that it's static. When I look at the example of the road out at Colic Bay and coastal erosion points, it's almost certain that that infrastructure is not going to withstand further erosion, and it's definitely worsening after each storm event. So could you maybe just explain the context around why?
So in relation to possible, you'll see is the last attachment for this report on page 247. ELT have gone through and looked at the likelihood of the event in relation to that table, and that is where they've placed it through their discussions. And in relation to the status of the risk, it's more about whether progress is being made towards this at the moment rather than relation to the risk itself. I don't know if Matt would like to speak to that specifically, or but it's rather than the climate change impacts increasing, it's whether the risk.
Thank you.
Through you, Your Worship. Just the only context I would add, Councillor Rowan, is possible talks about an event occurring, or a 25% chance of an event occurring within the next 12 months. And I think when we think about the sorts of events that are impacted or are caused perhaps to an extent by climate change, we think about intensifying rainfall events, or February event might be a good example of that. So it's not to say that so I think there's been a judgment call made there in terms of the frequency of events that we might attribute in some way, shape or form to climate change. From us, in terms of the risk being static, we do have in the upcoming LTP some additional funding and focus attributed to climate change and climate change adaptation. But as we know, the LTP doesn't come into effect until 1 July next year, so as it sits today, we are where we are. I guess we're aware it's part of, well, it's one of the significant assumptions that we've looked at and integrated into the next LTP, and it's we would like to, as an organisation, focus more time, effort and energy, budget allowing.
Thank you.
Councillor Menzies.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question around, a general question around risks, that where they noted here as static, but they're still quite high, such as risk 5, for example, and there's no proposed mitigations for the next quarter, is it? Is that just a moment in time matter, that there'll be more mitigations planned for the future quarters?
So through you, Your Worship. So this is constantly assessed. It's every quarter it's assessed by ELT as to what are the mitigations in place, and where it's placed as static means it's not determined to be getting any worse, but it's also not actually improving in any significant way. So it's staying at a level, and it's remembering that there is risk that is also acceptable to have. So having a static is also saying what we're doing is keeping it at a level that it can be, and then mitigations in place to make sure it's improving. So it is assessed quarterly if there are other things that can be put in place.
So next quarter it may be, because I'm just interested in how it moves from static to improved, and so it shifts down the risk register if there's no proposed actions around that. So next quarter there could be some proposed mitigations, so it shifts to improving.
Yes, so through you, Your Worship, even though the place that it sits in that top 10 may not move, but the mitigations against it can see whether or not we're making improvements against it, or it's staying at a level that it has been, or it's actually getting worse. So it may not shift up and down necessarily that 10 until those full assessments are done against that risk matrix on page 247. So ELT do assessment through all of these when they do meet on a quarterly basis.
Thank you.
Through you, Your Worship, can I just make the comment that in relation to whether it's worsening, improving or static is in relation to its assessed risk pre-treatment and then once we integrate mitigations, that's where the risk sits, and whether it's improving or static depends on how it's performed last period to this period. I guess the top 10 risks quite often will remain static for long periods of time on the basis that we haven't, the risk appetite for the organisation is such that they're comfortable with risk management approach as reflected in the risk register. It would only be if you, I guess, prioritised or requested staff focus more time, energy, resources, funding in a particular area as a result of discomfort with a particular risk element that you might want to track or signal to staff. We want to see an improving curve in relation to this risk for the following reasons, and that's the sort of thing we might push out in a deep dive.
Thank you, that's useful.
Councillor Douglas.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. So, Robin, you thank you for that. So, you mentioned under the growth and demand model that we could be missing out on funding opportunities. Do we in council have a dedicated resource to pursue all possible funding options available through government agencies?
Councillor Kramer might want to comment that.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. It's, this has been raised previously, and we are working with staff, and we're going to have a register as to all the possible avenues for gaining access to funding, external funding, and that will then be available to all councillors as well, so that they're fully informed of those potential funding streams that we could access. So we're just waiting to pull that together, and then that will become available. Yeah.
There are funding options that pop up as well. There's going to be one announced in the next few days that we knew nothing about. So, you know, there are other people that apply for some of this funding as well that don't.
That's right. So we need to sort of be close to the action, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we don't want to miss out.
Yeah.
Through you, which I just add that the content and context of this risk is not actually about the funding, it's about being prepared to access the funding with appropriate material.
Yes.
So the learnings from other regions and other councils, especially those in growth areas, is the support that they receive from funding agencies and funds administered by central government come with a significant amount of strategy and engagement and multi-agency consolidation to support those applications. And I think that's the work that is encouraged as part of mitigating this risk, because understanding the context of the other regions that we are alongside when these decisions are having to be made by Wellington means that the growth that those areas are facing is where the advantage from that perspective is significant. So we've got more to do around that strategy work. And I think that's the context of the risk that we should be, and we are focusing on. And further to Councillor Kramer's, where we're working with Great South through the community leadership team and pulling that information together and aligning alongside Great South and our neighbouring councils through the Mayoral Forum, conversations associated with some of those priorities as well.
Thank you. Very good question, Councillor Douglas. And we know the work that went behind the shovel-ready matter that Mr. Russell had to work through the night to get going. So, yeah, it's a risk, and we just got to keep monitoring it. So, good question. Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just around number 10, again, following up on
I talked about council's through you, Your Worship. I think I talked about council's relatively strong financial position in relation to other councils and the debt that those councils may have.
And that was impeding growth in our district.
I think it was in relation to the growth and demand model and what was looked at when those funding allocation rounds were completed, and I don't know if Rex can elaborate on that at all.
Just to your wish, being in a strong financial position is not the risk isn't around the growth, it's around again how applications are considered in relation to others. From a regional perspective and from an individual council perspective, sometimes those decision-making agencies will take into consideration our ability to pay in comparison, ourselves in comparison to other regions or other territories as well. So it's not the risk in relation to this risk. It's not about our strong financial position impeding growth. It's impeding our ability to access funds to support some of the projects or initiatives and opportunities that might be perceived as priorities for the council. So in simple terms, we would get responses like, well, it seems that you could actually pay for that yourselves rather than rely on external agencies to pay.
Okay, so Tauranga as an example, having debt levels around 250%, they're in a predicament and they're looking for assistance from the government. So, I mean, that's the other side
end
of the spectrum, isn't it? So we're in a strong position, we have to sort of fend for ourselves a wee bit, or get our backs against the wall with heavy debt loads.
We've got to keep an eye on what's out there that eases that. We don't want to get into the situations in other communities. Okay, Councillor Ford.
I was just conscious of that very thing that we're seen to be well off, but should we not be seen to be in a position where we have prepared to pay our share when what additional resources and funding was? So you would say you ask for something, you expect to pay some of it.
Certainly prepared to pay our share, but remember that we plan to pay our share, but as things pop up, we've got situations that are occurring in Southland now that we do require outside funding for, and that would be good if people started stepping up, which I'm sure they will. Councillor Duffy.
Well, I just think it's interesting. I mean, we're in a strong financial position as far as debt levels go. We're probably not in a strong financial position in terms of our infrastructure and the small rating base. But I think the reason that we've got no debt is because we've paid our way all the way along as we went, and we shouldn't be penalised for that.
Yeah, exactly.
And some councils have been prepared to borrow to keep rates down. We've never done that. So we've got to make sure that argument is well and truly presented.
And as we know, with the original PGF or Provincial Growth Fund, that asset testing type thing was part of that, and they changed that because of the perception, which was probably real, that some councils that hadn't looked after their communities were getting looked after, and those that had weren't. So that's actually across the board now.
And that's reflected in our VAR rate. It's pleasing that it has increased by 1%, but you know, compared to the neighbouring council to the east of us, they get a considerably high VAR rate because they are considered to be less well off, I believe.
And it comes down to how many ratepayers or you've got in your areas as well. You know, some are operating, Kaikoura for argument's sake, operating with a very minimal ratepayer base for a massive tourism market. Hopefully again soon. Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I was pleased to hear you mentioned the emerging risk, I think, because we were talking about the future role of local government. So it was pleasing to hear you bring that up. I mean, if the Three Waters takes that away from that service away from this council, interesting to see what's left as far as sort of key services that this council would be required to perform, and what the shape of the council would need to be once these services leave our remit. So it's good, I guess this is the start of planning for that.
And that's certainly a lot of, every council around New Zealand be waiting with bated breath as to what their future holds in regards to the Three Waters. Totally. And we need to start looking at it. So, are you saying it should be there, I hope?
I am.
Yeah, cool.
So through you, Your Worship, I think ELT felt this sat quite nicely under the risk relating to Council's strategic direction, and Cameron spoke to the Finance and Assurance Committee yesterday about just how important it was that Council is at the table and involved in those discussions and prepared, so that was the focus of the conversation yesterday.
Thank you. Any further questions? Be good to see cyber security in there too. Certainly emerging risk. Sorry, Councillor Harper, you got a question? No. No. Okay. All right. So thank you very much for that update. So you have the risk management update there with recommendations A through to D. Is there a councillor can move those recommendations? Councillor Menzies, seconded Councillor Cromer. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you, and thank you to the ELT for keeping an eye on that for us. 8.1 is the monthly financial report on page 249.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm here to present the monthly financial report for October, and I'd like you to take it as read. I'll just highlight a couple of points as I did to Finance and Assurance yesterday. Just to note, the carry forwards are entered in October and the forecasting round will occur in February. The operating income is 2% below projection year to date, and the major component of that 800,000 is around roading and footpaths, which are lower than projection, predominantly due to the timing of the work, particularly capital works. The expenditure is also 2% under projection, and the costs that sit within district leadership are the main component of that, being governance with some staff vacancies, and then we talked about the investments being below the interest charge for external loans, as we hadn't needed yet to draw down the Te Anau wastewater project loan. So the timing of that loan and any subsequent interest charge will be updated during the forecasting round. The question was raised yesterday regarding the below projection of the community centres, and we followed up on that, and the quarterly letters are sent out to all of the halls that are not controlled by council, and they need to provide their financial reports before we release the rates that we have collected on their behalf. If we look at the capital program, for the quarter we're 2.3 million lower than projection year to date. The main variance being around the project for the wastewater Te Anau project, and that construction cost is to be mainly incurred between December and April. Are there any questions?
Thank you for that. Are there any questions in relation to the financial report? Okay, if not, I'll put it. I know there was a lot of some questions yesterday. I'll put that we receive this report. Is it Councillor Douglas, seconded Councillor Fraser. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you for that. Next item on the agenda is 8.2, management report from our Chief Executive.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've had the pleasure of going to 4 community boards so far, and now I'm beginning to see where some of the reports that, from my point of view, were really a summary of things that Council had already considered, actually do have quite a useful role in helping communicate with the community board, so I can certainly see the value of this report. Just on that first page, on page 267, I had the pleasure of attending the opening of the museum on Stewart Island. And from my perspective, that was a stunning example of how council can be involved and support something that is people and culture related without necessarily being about infrastructure. And a really useful reminder of just how important social, people, cultural things are for communities. And that was for the councillors and His Worship who attended as well. That was a very significant day for Stewart Island, and I'm sure Councillor Ford would
Very, very pleased with that.
would support that. It's a real shame that Angus McKay has resigned from Emergency Management Southland. He's done a superb job. I imagine there's a recruitment process going to be underway soon. I can't give you an update on where that's at. It's a bit there about Building Solutions team. Obviously we're seeing, just as the rest of the country is, quite a steady level of activity in terms of people who spent time at home and realised that renovation or building was a viable alternative to international travel, or even any kind of travel for a while. And that team obviously has a lot on and have been working hard to keep up with all the applications. Just leaping through, I'm reflecting on a question that I think Councillor Byers or Councillor Owen asked in relation to page 275, which was around the land and water plan implementation. That's the Environment Southland plan that had been out and had been, the three territorial authorities were working together to resolve some outstanding issues, technical matters largely, around the definition of what a discharge, particularly around stormwater, was. And in paragraph 69 it refers to the fact that there was meant to be mediation this week, but in fact that hasn't, the Environment Court hasn't identified a date for that, so that will obviously be carrying on into the new year. For the territorial authorities, just confirming exactly how those rules would work is an important, it has been an important thing that councils have had to be involved in. So it's taking a very long time, but in light of all of the work that our council has to do to meet future objectives around the environment, knowing the rules around this is very important. Obviously the farming community is reasonably focused on this too. The Three Waters reforms, we've been touched on variously through council meetings. Councillor Byers has raised the question again this morning about the future of local government, and really our best response is to make sure that council is engaged in those conversations and any others related to council activities, recognising that the serious decisions are going to be made by central government. But our involvement, and we've got very active involvement through Mr. Russell and the request for information process, which we are doing extremely well in, but shouldn't be underestimated just how demanding that is. But that's a good example of the sort of engagement that will be required. A little update there on Tianao wastewater under the projects. That's going well, but as other industries are starting to feel the pinch, we're very mindful that there may be some delivery issues in terms of some of the pieces of equipment needed as the world supply chains are sort of grinding to a bit of a halt post-COVID. The team have got a good mitigation in place for that, so they're well aware of it, and I commend that project that's now being run on a risk-based approach, and it's going really well. I'll probably leave it there. If there are any questions, I'll very happily fire them across to the line-up over here. The Owls.
The Owls. Yeah. Thank you. Are there any questions around the management report? Councillor Cash.
Thank you, Worship. On page 270 for Leadership Academy, that's really exciting to see that project going out to further out into the district. How is that being advertised and how is it being, is there a selection process or what have we, how's that rolling?
Through you, Worship, the detail is still being worked through between the community leadership team, chamber and the communities themselves. And I don't think it will be stock standard for one sub-region versus another. There's a lot of, I suppose, an attempt to have various entities and agencies involved. I think through some of the Welcome Communities funding, for argument's sake, the opportunity exists for a selection process that way. Through some of the community boards themselves, there's an opportunity, and that's still being worked through. So I think once it's developed, it will certainly come back to you directly with this is how your community members can participate, and it will be different across the years.
Thank you. And also, if I may, the Community Service Awards, is it only for individuals, or I appreciate that it's not for community groups, but like could be a couple or could be a family or...
I've certainly been to one where it was a couple, and they're initiated through the community again.
Yep.
Yeah, and yeah, definitely not for groups as far as I'm aware.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments around the management report? Certainly very happy to see the Hollyford Road progress as far as it's done in such a short time, so top marks to everyone that was involved in that, and thanks to our partners NZTA over that. Monkey Island, it's been a long process to get to where it is, but it's fantastic to see where it is. However, there was an incident where some lunatic, for want of a better term, did some damage there. I understand the police are still looking for somebody in relation to that matter. Just quite disappointing after all that community consultation for one person. I'll say one person because there's only one person responsible for riding a motorbike across wet concrete. Just so disappointing. And I see, Louise, that we're launching Antino, which will be a pretty good portal, is that what you call it, for people to look into and see what we're up to. I know it works very well in the Gore District Council. Okay, there being no further comments or questions, management report, I'm happy to move it. Is there a second, please, Councillor Harper? All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Chief Executive has to leave for a short time, and I believe Councillor Kramer is going to step back in regards to this next item on page 285, which is the appointment of trustees for the Milford Community Trust.
Do these count? Just as a...
The turkey...
I was looking at that. I suspect I got the short straw on that one.
I just don't know where the turkey one's gone. Who's got that on?
That's the natural. All right, here we go. Look, I even get two. Do I get the shades as well?
Okay, thanks, Simon.
All right. Thank you for that. Take the report as read. Essentially, we have the situation where we have had an interim chair for a while because of the consideration of the future of the trust, which seems to have taken some time, but there are reasons. I think I just had my photo taken. There are reasons for that. And partly it has been around the recreation centre and getting the operators on board for the funding of that, and then more latterly, obviously, as we'd been successful with that, we then had the flooding, which created some issues, and then that led into COVID, which is around funding, and the impetus for the project has sort of disappeared there. The other side of it too is looking at changes to the trust deed, and I think I got my photo taken again, possibly. changes to the trust deed, and we have some drafted and ready to go to the trustees on that. The other side of it is we've been operating with less than the full amount of trustees to date, because of this holding pattern. We needed to have a full number of trustees in order to make a substantive change to or decisions on substantive changes to the trustee, and we've now filled those positions. So this is around continuity. This is Councillor Kramer has been in that position for now just over a couple of years, but we're actually getting to the point where we had hoped to get to probably 18 months ago. So it makes, from my perspective, it makes sense that that this reappointment is made to continue those discussions and have people around the table who have the knowledge and the history of what we've done so far. Any questions?
Very good, thank you. Any questions in relation to this? Councillor Menzies.
Thank you, Worship. I guess I understand your explanation for the reasons of delay. I'm just a bit concerned at the length of time that an interim chair is in place, and acknowledge the importance of the statement you're making about consistency. There is the recent appointments as trustees, so you have a full complement now. Does that mean that it's necessary to wait a further 12 months to look at the appointment of a permanent chair and consider the trustee, or can it be brought forward from that?
I think the reason for the time frame is I'm unclear as to how long it's going to take to actually go through the legal process of changing the trustee. The trust is going to, it will be on their agenda for February, so we'll be looking to kick that off early in the new year, but it's just making sure that we've got that time. Once that goes through, there is absolutely no reason why we couldn't revisit the chair position during the year.
Yes, because this is not about who holds a position, it's about the interim chair and the continuation of that. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions in regards to this matter? Okay, you have the appointment there, the recommendations A through to D. D being the imperative one, agrees to appoint Councillor Kramer as the Chair of the Milford Community Trust. Do I have a mover and seconder for that? Councillor Owen. Councillor Fraser seconded. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Simon. Thank you for taking your glasses off. There was a comment here that you look like a blowfly hanging around the turkey.
Appreciate that, Fiona. Thank you for that.
I'm not saying where it came from.
All right. Have a good Christmas.
Thank you. Thanks, Simon. Next item on the, welcome back, Councillor Kramer. The next item on the agenda is the appointment of trustees, item 9.2, page 289, and Councillors Duffy and Keese are going to step back from the table for this matter. Thank you.
I do have something here. Thank you, Your Worship. This brief report covers two different matters. The first is the appointment of SDC representative trustees to the Whakamanatu Waituna Trust, and the second being confirming Council's agreement to the change to the reporting structure. Having discussed with staff counterparts at Environment Southland, I've been advised that although our representatives were appointed for a 3-year term in 2018, to enable the ongoing representation to align with this triennium and the trienniums going forward, we should appoint again till the end of the 2019-22 triennium, so we can then appoint for the 22 triennium. Councillors Duffy and Keast have been continuing in their role, so we have not had a lack of governance on that trust at this stage. The second is the changing reporting structure. This has been suggested through an independent evaluation, and I've discussed with staff from the Environmental Services team, and they've considered the change and recommend that Council endorse the new reporting structure, confident that SDC's continuing governance oversight would mitigate any potential risk of not having an SDC staff person on that joint working party. And I'm happy to take questions if I can.
Thank you. Any comments or questions in relation to this matter? Councillor Byers. Sorry, Don, I just lost it there for a minute. Councillor Byers.
What does this trust do? What's it tasked to do?
I was really hoping that Fran would be here. I know it's not appropriate when you've both declared an interest, but you know a lot more about the trust than I do.
I'm happy for you to explain that, Councillor Duffy.
Well, the trust was formed as a partnership between the Runanga and Incorporated Ngāi Tahu, the Department of Conservation, Environment Southland and STC as sort of the main stakeholders in Waituna. When you might recall a few years ago there was concern about it going anaerobic and becoming quite a saturated state. So some urgency was put around getting together as a partnership and working on improving the overall lake, as it were. And so part of that has been money has been sourced from the municipal environment, and land neighbouring four farms have been purchased, which is allowing more flexibility in the lagoons levels as one of the main activities of that. So STC's participation, I've sort of seen that as being sort of a community representative aspect. I mean, everyone brings their own role that they're representing to the trust, and so Julie and I believe we sort of represent the community, whereas Environment South are, you know, the water quality aspect, and we have got their motives in it, as have DOC. So it's actually gone along quite well, and quite a lot's been achieved, and there's more to come.
Thank you for that explanation. And it coming about by flipping, I think, is the common term for the lagoon. It was starting to flip over, and it's a very fragile environment, and it's fantastic to see everyone getting together, landowners and all those other agencies.
The amazing thing to me when it first started off was this was about the 34th lagoon in New Zealand that was going this way, and this was the first one anything had been done about it in advance. There's some being done remedy after they're being done. I was amazed we hadn't learned something by the.
And do you believe you're making tangible?
Well, you don't know. You don't really know, but I think given the hot summers we've had and so on, it would have been touch and go on a few occasions. Overall, there's a lot of small steps been taken. It makes.
Thank you for that answer.
Thank you, Worship. So it's been tasked with improving the health of that ecosystem.
Yep.
Sounds the land and water.
And restoring Mahingakai to Henry is another important part of it.
I wonder if we could play another role with the way we manage our infrastructure down that area and remove the chemical load from the water tables that flow into that lagoon.
That's all.
They go from mowing to, just mow rather than poisoning.
Don't think we do too much down that area, do we?
There's work being done to remove, lower nitrogen and phosphate levels.
And certainly a lot of planting being done as well, isn't there, in the car park area up the top?
Yes,
It's well worth a visit if you haven't been down there.
Well, I'm just referring to the roadside management with the use of chemicals, and I'm wondering if perhaps we could look at a different way of managing the roadside.
Well, that's what Mr. Duffy was saying, that they're looking at that, did you say?
Oh, not roadside management.
Oh,
no.
right, okay.
No, but in the farming.
In the farming side.
They're going to cut and carry and so on.
I'm sure the two councillors are responsible will probably have some input into that, but they may have listened to that. Sorry, I lost your name. You were just looking like Dr. Seuss there, and I lost it either.
Well, at least
Mr.
call your blowfly.
Okay, any further questions in regards to this matter? There not being, then we have the two matters to agree to confirm the appointment of both councillors to the Whakamana Waituna Trust, and agree to confirm its arrangement as indicated under E. Councillor Kramer seconded Councillor Menzies. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you and welcome back to the table, Councillors Duffy and Keast. So we now have a situation where we were going to move into confidential for the next item, but we are running quite well ahead of schedule. I just wonder whether we go straight back to 7.1, which we'll have to get Nicole up for. So we are still in an open meeting. I don't know. Louise, did you want to explain that to the media, or are you happy that they've made the decision to leave?
Sorry? You should say it's still an open meeting.
Did she think we were...
She knew. She was just leaving.
Oh, okay. Cool. So we're going to look at this next item, 7.1, the submissions that have come in, and you've heard from the two submitters this morning, and then we will look at deliberating on this matter, bearing in mind what occurred yesterday in regards to Audit New Zealand saying that we'll be meeting on the 14th of January, so we need to progress some of these matters. Okay. All right, welcome, Nicole. Might be a good idea. Item 7.1 is the submissions in relation to the draft revenue and financing policy rating review. Looking forward to your report, and then we'll move into deliberating on the item.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, as you heard, you had a submission today. We had the same report on the Finance and Assurance meeting yesterday in terms of getting some direction from that committee about any additional information that they wanted to see prior to council making any deliberations or things to further consider. That committee didn't suggest any particular items that council should or staff should prepare in order for council to consider and deliberate in the submissions. So I'll just run through a summary of the report, sorry for those that were here yesterday in terms of what we say. I'm going to repeat a bit of that, but for those councillors that weren't here. So we drafted the policy, we put out for consultation, and we got 29 submissions back on that, and so it was really around the policy and the rating review, and the rating review was actually the bulk of the issues around where we got feedback and also where we were making the most of the changes. The policy itself is quite a broad guiding document, and so it does provide some proportions and some flexibility there in terms of how we fund. And then the rating review is the more particular side of things in terms of what type of rate, who's going to be charged it, and how much money we're going to collect from that rate. So in terms of the feedback that we got, so we had 29 submissions, and on page 7 of the report there's just a summary of the feedback that we had from the people that actually completed the specific questions in the feedback form. We had a number that also just provided submissions as well, so I wasn't going to say whether they were in support or against based on that, so they're not included in these percentages. So in terms of the question around local services to be funded through community board rates, we had 89% support for that, as well as 95% support for the use of urban, semi-urban and rural differentials. We had 95% support for the move to district-wide funding for cemeteries, local representation and litter bins. 86% support. I should note these percentages I'm adjusting to include the late submission that came in from Federated Farmers as well, so I've just adjusted these manually from those submissions. 86% support for the district-wide stormwater funding with the serviced and unserviced differential. 76% support for the CASA new local rate to fund their activities. 52% support for funding a portion of the Stewart Island wharves and jetties from the general rate, and 43% support for funding a portion of the cost from the Te Anau Airport, excluding existing loan repayments. As you'll see in the report, a number of submissions have raised particular points of detail around some of those, particularly around Patients Bay and its inclusion in the Fiordland Community Board urban area. We also had some submissions in general around just wastewater issues, waste management issues around the proposal to combine that and combine that with the general rate. And as I mentioned yesterday, the issue that was raised by Federated Farmers around the concern of the split and the proportion of the amount that's collected from a capital value versus the fixed charged, and if we put that into the general rate, whether that would be basically reversed the proportions. And when we've talked about that previously, we've talked about when we incorporate it in the general rate, we'll maintain the proportion, so we'll adjust the total percentage coming from the capital value in the UAGC, so that will have a net zero effect, that change on people's rates. I just wanted to clarify that. Let me just go to the report.
Doing good.
Keep up with myself. And we also did highlight the fact that we had considered making some changes to wastewater and how we rate for that, and indicated that after those considerations we decided to make no further change. We got some comments on that, but wasn't really in relation to the question that we asked about whether people were happy. One submitter was happy and one made a specific comment in relation to that. So the report itself provides more detail on the commentary that's been provided around each of those things. So I don't know, through you, Your Worship, if you'd like to talk about each of those issues separately and have a discussion about that, or if you'd like to just receive the submissions and then...
I think if we move to receive the submissions, and then we can chat about how we're going to go forward with.
So if anybody's got any questions for me on the submissions or the items or the summary in the report, I'm happy to answer those.
Yeah, but we're going to read. Just discussing whether we do this now or after the deliberations. I think.
No, that's
No, you need to have a yak because you need to come up with
We're receiving the submissions, and there's no recommendations from these submissions.
No. There need to be a new if that would be something along the lines of
so I'd sort of thought if we
agree
were...
to the draft revenue and financing policy and rating review submissions with the following addition, changes, whatever. So we need to have a new if.
Yeah, I've got considers the feedback received through the formal consultation process on the policy and written feedback received from the 4th of November to the 4th of December. And then consider how it would like to proceed on the following, and then we just work through the following issues if that...
Yeah, there needs to be
that's
extra
okay.
than what's
Yep.
in ADA.
If council wishes to, yeah.
So we can do all that at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Let's carry on. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of the issues that have been raised, so in terms of the local representation, community board cemetery, so we're moving now from what they've said to what council would like to do in relation to the issues that have been raised in the submission, if they'd like some change.
Councillor Owen.
Sorry, just one quick question. I noticed that one of the submitters requested to speak, but...
Yeah, they spoke this morning in public.
No, the other one, Chris and Viv
Oh,
Shaw.
sorry, yes. So, no, I did check in with them and they were actually away. And then I talked about we could do that later if they wanted, and they said, oh no, they're actually quite comfortable with what I've written. Yep. Okay. So, yeah, I'm on page 13 and we're just talking about the funding of local representation, community board, cemeteries and litter bins district-wide. So, as I said, we had general widespread support from that approach. Generally, and I thought what we could talk about is just we're talking about establishing 9 community board areas, so 1 community board rate for each area, and that you're comfortable with that. We also talking about the differentials within those areas, so the urban differential, which gets a full charge, the semi-urban differential gets a half charge, and the rural differential, which gets a quarter charge. So that approach, and then I thought we could talk about the definition of those areas, which is the issues that's been raised by Patients Bay submitters, about how those areas have been defined as a separate sub-item. So I thought if we talked,
No, that's cool.
So if we talked about generally, we agree with that approach with 9 community board areas and using those differentials on that basis. And any discussion around that or things that we'd like to look at changing?
I agree with the differentials. I think that the Patience Bay issue needs to be discussed. I'm undecided because I don't know enough about it. But on the face of what we hear and see, it seems as though that there's a really strong case for what they're saying.
Yep. And Councillor Byers, you had input into that. You wanted input into that, and you talked about that this morning. So you wanted to make those discussions now then?
Yeah, we can make that. Yeah, so I just had some further information that I did ask from staff, which was, and I was just trying to find also the page number on the agenda of the maps that relate to Te Anau, or Fiordland, sorry.
Page 191 Gorge Road.
I have it marked
Te
here.
Anau's on 203.
203? Cool. Okay. So it's 203 and 204 both relate to Te Anau. So 204 is actually the urban area. So when we talk about the community board rate, this is the area that we'd be talking about. So in terms of, you can see that we've got Patience Bay in there, and then on the other side of the highway we've also got Rocky Ridge, right? And then if you look down to the southeast, we've got the area behind the golf course that's proposed to be included in the urban area, and also extending out to Black Lane to the east, okay? And so when we met with the community board, we had quite a long discussion about these peri-urban areas and whether they should or shouldn't be included in the Fiordland Community Board area, and they were quite certain and clear that they did feel that it was appropriate on the basis that that they come to town and use those services quite a lot more probably for work on a daily basis than other areas do. In the circumstance of Patience Bay, they are quite different than Rocky Ridge, the area behind the golf course, and some parts out towards Black Lane, because those areas actually don't have stormwater and they don't have the same level of street lights or any footpaths. So Patience Bay does actually have 426 metres of concrete footpaths, 6 street lights, and 3,043 metres of curb and channel, which relates to the roadway. And in terms of stormwater, the pipes are on the roads there, but they do not connect to the properties, as the submitter indicated. But that's very similar to other stormwater areas that we've defined in the district as well. There's a pipe running through providing drainage that is supporting taking away rainwater from those properties, but it's not actually there for the connection for their own stormwater. So that's very similar to places like Wairio or Oropuki, where we've called them serviced for stormwater as well. So I've sort of covered off, so you'll notice the difference between the map on page 204 and the map on page 203 is the 203 map does not have Rocky Ridge, the area behind the golf course, in it for stormwater service because they do not have any pipes, whereas Patience Bay do have some pipes in the area, so that's stormwater service. So I can be a bit confusing. So I think if we talk about the urban area first and the definition of the Fiordland Community Board urban area, and that was to fund things like footpaths, street lights, parks, playgrounds, and water facilities. And so from a staff perspective, there is definitely some infrastructure there that is not in Rocky Ridge or the area behind the golf course. And so if you were looking at considering whether they should or should not be in the urban area, then we would also need to look at those other areas, which totals about around 146 rating units are involved in that change. Yeah, but I can answer any further questions and clarify that once you guys talk about it.
Councillor Menzies.
Thank you. There was just discussion yesterday about whether the community board had made a submission or not. Was that able to be located?
So their submission is in the documents?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the one you were referring to.
Yeah, I made an error.
Right,
So
okay.
the other submissions have been made and they were relating to a different policy. So I do apologise.
So the Fiordland Community Board have made a submission in this document that indicates that they're supportive of the proposals that they discussed, which was the inclusion of all of those areas as per the map, and that reflects what their discussion has been.
Yes, that was done with what I've read.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Douglas.
So is there an opportunity here to have a semi-urban classification for them?
Yeah, so that is at your discretion. We don't have any other townships that have urban and semi-urban in them, but we could establish that. I have done some number crunching. So if we were to move all of the properties that I'm talking about, not just Patience Bay, out of the urban and into the rural, that would take the urban rate from $206 for the community board to $216, and the rural rate would go from $52 to $54. If we were to establish a semi-urban area and we applied that to the whole area, because I haven't had too much time to do this, the rural rate would be $53 and the urban rate would be $212. So it's not making, and the semi-urban would be $106. So that means Patience Bay and Rocky Ridge and behind the golf course would pay $106. So that's just to give you, it doesn't make a massive difference, but if you think those peri-urban shouldn't be being charged the full charge and they should get a half charge as a semi-urban, they'll get half of the urban and the rural will get quarter. But in terms of the overall movements, it doesn't make that much difference to what the rurals would have paid anyway. It's just those particular properties.
Well, I think if I may, I think it does address the point that you're making. It does address that there is a difference. And talking about Patience Bay and Rocky Ridge, to have a semi-rural, then that reflects that that's slightly different to what the town is. So I think that would be more acceptable, and we recognise that there is that difference.
Councillor Fraser and then Councillor Scott.
When this went before the boards, did we have the semi-rural as an option then, or was it something we added in?
So that's
later, wasn't it?
so we didn't talk about, but it did go back.
Yeah.
So the community board did talk about it at when they saw their rates at their rating meeting in November. It would have been, I would imagine. And there was an opportunity for them to rediscuss that if they wanted. But if the council's of the mind, there's nothing stopping you from having treating that area as semi-urban. My question would just be the whole area, the semi-urban, or as a part of it semi-urban and part of it rural.
Councillor Scott, Councillor Owen, Councillor Menzies.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Fraser asked one of my questions. The other one is, was the community board aware of the opposition towards this, or did they come and submit to the community board at all?
There's no submissions made at that time.
There was a discussion in the workshop that we had this discussion with them previously, and that it's been, an issue that we've talked to them about, or they've had consulted on and provided submissions to in the past. And so that was part of the dialogue that occurred in.
So they were aware of that, but they still thought it.
Yeah, but it was a long time ago, so it was 2008. So some of those members aren't those same members, and so they might not have been aware of that process.
I was confused with that. The submitter thought it was 2015, but I'm sure it was well before then.
I believe it was 2008. Yeah.
Councillor Owen and then Councillor Menzies.
I'm a little bit hesitant in terms of appearing like we're overturning something, a recommendation that's come from a community board around the zoning, but I'm also very aware in thinking back on the community board discussion for Oraka Aparima around the difference between Colic Bay and Riverton, for example, and that's when we first started talking about the semi-urban rates, and the description that those locals had given me of Pleasance Bay fits more with the Colic Bay, which is zoned as semi-urban. So I think we have to bring that district-wide focus back for consistency. So,
I mean, you do have the option, so we can, how do I put it? The rating is formally set as part of the LTP process. So the definition of these areas, we're doing them now because we're trying to get some clarity, but the definition of those areas we do as part of the LTP confirmation. So we could go back to the community board and say, council's preference is semi-urban, they've moved in that way, that's what they plan to do, and bring that commentary back if they had any concerns about that when we sign off the policy in January.
Well, it also picks up your comment that it's a district-wide approach rather than just an isolated community. That's very, very important. There's other areas that have established. So from a council perspective, we're taking a district-wide approach and not just a local community. So that's part of our role, so I think we've got it right.
So just before I move to Councillor Menzies, that would be in relation to the Colic Bay. What about the other areas in Te Anau that were have been identified where they've
Applies
got.
all three of them.
So yeah,
All
so we
three
could.
would be-
Well, it would be if I'm. Yeah, so if I'm to think about the wishes of the Te Anau Community
Yep.
Board and the wishes of the submitters, and not having heard from anyone in Rocky Ridge or behind the golf course, I would treat them all the same because the board has treated them the same.
As long as the board are happy with that semi-title. Councillor Menzies.
Thank you, Bishop. Councillor Owen's comment has addressed my question that we need to be clear about where else in the district this would apply to, because we're now going to urban, semi-urban, semi-rural and rural. So
It's just semi-urban. I think
Semi-urban.
when he talks about semi-rural, he's meaning semi-urban.
right, okay.
It's
So
only
it,
the three.
so,
It's semi. It's just the three.
so it's just the three.
Yeah.
I clarified that too. Thank you. Because I thought we were going to 4. Yeah. Okay. Yes. So that clarification. Thank you.
Oh, well, just, I noticed like Edendale, there's probably some cases you could make on the fringes of a number of places.
And that's the district we live in, the variations.
From a staff perspective, I would say that when we've done, look, we did develop a set of rules and guidelines, and when we've been out and talked, I would have to say that Fiordland was the one case that varied quite substantially, and I think I did mention that at the time that we talked to you about the rating areas. That was quite different in a more substantial way than any other areas. So I have greater confidence that we're, not confidence, but I feel like we're quite consistent in some of those other areas, and where we have included peri-urban, it is more on a intensive developmental basis as opposed to, some of these areas are quite much more lifestyle, which is quite different than. But that was a conscious choice and recommendation by the board. We had a good dialogue around it.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, any other comments or questions around that? So I'm hearing that we have the 3 categories, for want of a better term, as long as that doesn't cause any issues for the rating team.
So I just have one question. There was one issue raised in the submissions about Milford, as well from the Fiordland Community Board. So at the moment in the Te Anau Community Board area, it's not rated. They provide all their own services through DOC and their concessionaires arrangements. And so I would also be seeking to make an adjustment to that to exclude Milford from the Fiordland Community Board area as well, on that basis. Yeah, so I'd like us to be consistent.
We do know, we don't pay for any services in Milford, as you say.
I think I'm going to defer to the.
No, at the current point in time, we excluded Milford from the boundaries because they paid the Milford Community Trust concession, and that concession covered off a lot of the waste activities and the other activities that were going on in that community, and we don't really provide any other services within Milford, so it's why they were excluded.
It's almost like paying twice. You're paying your rates in Milford and you're paying your rates in Te Anau as well, so I think that to exclude this is the best option.
Councillor Byers, Councillor Duffy.
Thank you. So in Milford, they are contributing to the Te Anau Airport, for example. It doesn't have any effect around that.
No, it's a separate rate. Yeah. I think they are rated for the Te Anau Airport.
Still rated for the Te Anau
Yeah.
Airport as part of the,
Yeah.
for any properties that are rated in there.
So they do pay some rates, but they're just not the community board rate currently.
Councillor Duffy.
I noticed on the maps in Stewart Island that Ruapuki's included in the map, but we don't rate it, do we?
No.
So why have we got it included in the map?
So most of that property is Māori freehold land, and so it's under that the section of the Act that excludes that, and then we've got our own policy as well. However, if our policy was to change and we did want to rate it, we would rate that area. So it's set based on what the entire community board area is. Now it just happens that it won't get charged the rate because we have a remissions policy in place for that.
I think Ruapuki's the only one that has paper roads on it as well.
We did have a discussion with the Stewart Island Community Board at that time about whether there's parts of the area that should be defined as rural and what we've got in terms of the one area and defining it as rural. They were happy with on the basis that quite a few of those areas aren't rated. Yeah.
Okay, so you have enough information on that, Nicole?
Yep, definitely. So then we move on to the stormwater. So it's very much a similar type thing. So there are some differences in the stormwater rate. However, what we're proposing to do is to have a district-wide stormwater targeted rate, and we're having differentials of serviced and unserviced. And in terms of the definition of those areas, in terms of Patients Bay, so as I mentioned to you, the map on page 204 indicates, 203, indicates that Patients Bay is serviced for stormwater because it has that pipe network running through, as opposed to Rocky Ridge and the Eriebokana Golf Course that doesn't have those services. So you had some feedback from the submitters around we don't get stormwater, we're not connected, our properties can't be connected. Our treatment is serviced isn't, like as I said, isn't related to which houses are connected and which properties are specifically connected, but where stormwater drainage pipes are provided and swales and things like that to take flooding away, and that therefore the properties in that vicinity should have benefit, which would be similar to Patients Bay. So I guess I'm seeking guidance that you're happy with the approach to the targeted rate district-wide, the differential of serviced and unserviced, and that the definition of the rating boundaries in terms of what's serviced is okay, including what we've got, with the same proviso about Milford being considered to be not included in this rate.
So what we're saying there is if you've got stormwater, you need to help pay for it.
In the vicinity.
Yep.
Yep.
Support that.
Yep. Any comments or questions around that proposal? So this is across the district?
I just note that there were some submissions, like Federated Farmers one was quite opposed to that.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. So they were opposed to rural areas contributing towards the stormwater rate. They weren't opposed to the community board rate. It's the similar basis of thinking in terms of the policy, so that rural areas definitely do provide their own drainage, but it's when they come to town and use those services in the towns where they are provided, and that's why the differential's at the same level as the community board rate at a quarter charge. So it's really your discretion around that. It was really around reflecting the fact that there is an element of wider public benefit to providing stormwater that prevents flooding of urban areas that everybody in Southland can then access whenever they want, basically, that's the policy analysis side.
I'm just aware that there are a lot of farmers who don't necessarily come to towns in the district, that their town days are spent in Invercargill, so they would provide an argument that they actually don't use those stormwater areas.
And there's a lot, and as we've talked about quite a lot through this process, rating isn't a full user pay system, it's a taxation system. So it's about, we've got some costs and we need to share them out on what we think is a fair and reasonable basis, based on our perception of benefit. It's never going to match one-to-one with who uses it and who's going to get charged. So it's ideally it would be like that, but it's very, as they always say, to quote people, blunt tool.
Okay, Councillor Duffy, Councillor Keys, Councillor Byers.
I was just going to say that, like, whether the rural people shop in the local town or not, their children go to school in that town. There's the fire brigade and all these other organisations that are serviced by that. So I think with the differential, the way we've got it set, it's as fair as you can get it.
Councillor Keys, Councillor Byers, Councillor Harper.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, just concur, really. If they're not shopping in the local town, they should be. And yeah, it's sharing it out, you know, like, yeah.
Local, keep it local.
It isn't actually that fair, but, you know, if you want to go down to nth degree, but it is fair in making it simple and keeping our structures simple and easily managed, so.
It's useful. I did speak to the policy person from Federated Farmers, and just they won't know the detail of the ward rate being removed. So the ward rate was where a lot of farmers were already paying for these services. So, and that varied quite widely across the district in terms of how that was used. So this is trying to bring in that consistency of how rural properties are treated in regards to these services.
And we would be explaining that when we go out for consultation as well, that, you know, it is identified now, but once it was sort of in the ward rate, so they were making a contribution anyway, so it's not like a new rate.
Yeah. Councillor Byers has gone. Councillor Harper.
Yeah, Your Worship, I just wanted to ask a question back on the cemetery one, but we've gone past that one.
Nope,
No, haven't got there yet.
haven't got there yet.
Okay, well, we'll get there.
I think I might have jumped. Did I jump?
I'm just in a hurry to get to the cemetery.
Yeah.
You are live. You are live, councillors. Councillor Owen.
Just on the stormwater one, I just think it's going to be really important to be proactive on the communications, otherwise your rating team is going to be the one who receives the backlash when everyone's invoices come in and having stormwater specified on there. So just encourage you to be proactive in the comms around that, and the fact that they have been contributing through the ward rate in the past, because a lot of people see that line and just perceive that as an additional new charge. So.
Okay, so enough guidance, direction on that one?
In terms
I
of...
think we might take a break.
You want to take a break?
Talking about stormwater or anything like that, people might want to take a break.
Yeah, that'd be good.
So if we come back here at quarter two? That's, is that okay?
Yeah.
So you've got just under a quarter of an hour to go and have a cup of tea. And Councillor Kramer will take over the meeting from there.
Perfect.
You'll reconvene. The process that will follow is we'll continue with the deliberations, then we'll break and we'll go to public excluded, and then we'll go back into open meeting, and during the public excluded we've got a report to consider, but it also provides an opportunity for Nicole to look at preparing some recommendations to tie in any acceptance of the finance policy and rating review submissions that we've received, so we need to tidy that up as to what we've agreed to. And then we'll go back into open and look at those recommendations. Does that make sense?
Yep.
That being the case, back to you.
Yep. So I did jump forward a little bit, so I'm jumping back a bit to page 13 where we're talking about local representation, cemeteries and litter bins.
Sorry, page what?
13. So that proposal, as you know, involves funding those activities now district-wide. Most of the submissions that we've received were in support of that, in terms of that being a good idea. And there was some feedback from certain submitters about, sorry, I'm just, yeah, no, that's right, what services they perceive that they get or don't get. Yeah, but overall, I think it was general support for that that proposal.
Okay. Anybody want to make any comments? Okay, Councillor Hartman.
I saw you get the banner. Nicole, what difference does it make when the cemeteries are actually operated and owned privately or by local clubs and things like that? Talking to Happy Cemetery, which is owned, operated and managed by the
trust,
local Lions Club. Does this rate still apply to them, or is there what's happening there?
So this is to fund the council-run cemeteries. So we have had quite a long discussion around, you know, where a cemetery is trust-owned or run by a trust. At the moment we're funding council-owned cemeteries, and so the rates will be collected and will go towards the operation and maintenance of council-run cemeteries across the district. It doesn't include trust-run cemeteries. We had you'll recall, a long discussion around the fact that just because you've got a cemetery in your local area doesn't mean you don't use other cemeteries in other areas. It's not to stop trust-run cemeteries approaching council or talking to council about their funding or support for their operations. I wouldn't want to, you know, like suggest anything, but this is primarily around how we fund the assets that we have.
So in actual fact, we probably won't be paying a cemetery rate to it anyway.
What's that, sorry?
Do we not pay a cemetery rate to it?
You will. So every property in Southland will now, as part of the general rate, make a contribution to cemeteries.
Yeah. Okay.
And there were a number of areas, like Adalassa Community Board, where they just had one, they've made a contribution to mowing at the Waikaia Cemetery, but the other cemeteries are all trust-run. So we, you know, that was part of the discussion around how do we feel about that, and at the time we were comfortable with that approach.
I'm just a wee bit concerned that the people that do look after it, they say, well, we've got to charge rates for it, we're not going to look after it, full stop. And have we got provisions for the extra cost to look after that cemetery?
I think there's two processes that are going on. So we haven't budgeted in our budgets and our long-term plan for any additional item for cemeteries we don't own. If those trusts, I would envisage, feel like they would like some support from council, that would go through a different process, possibly through the LTP process, making submission or requests for support for individual community boards. Like I said, Adalassa did provide a contribution to mowing at the Waikaia Cemetery that was another trust-run cemetery, so different boards do different things. However, in the same area, Balfour is trust-run, no mowing, no nothing, so that one wouldn't get any funding. So I think if there are trusts who are looking for, struggling with their operations and they're looking for support, there's appropriate channels for them to go either to the community board or come and speak to council about that. But it's a separate item to the rating discussion.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think we also talked about the fact that there is an administration function that also forms part of those cemeteries as well. So it's not just for the provision of the cemeteries, it's also for the provision of the information information around those cemeteries which many people access for the genealogical reasons there. I think there also was the context, it was around $5 per property, and I know that might not change the principle that's involved in it, but it does also put it just into context.
Councillor Keith?
Thank you.
Yeah, that'll do.
That discussion was one that when in putting it in context that it's $5 and actually all of there's many trusts in Southern Southland that own the cemeteries down there, and the services SDC does provide to them through the registration of the of who's who in the area, in their areas. SDC does provide those people, every cemetery with service, some different levels of it or whatever, but $5. The other reason of the benefit across the land, the way $5 didn't seem like a bad sort of a deal to be able to sell to most.
Councillor Duffy?
Oh, just really along the same lines what Councillor Keith is saying, and SDC has had installed those cemetery panels in all cemeteries. There's all that sort of support
Cost,
that
expense,
happens. And it is $5 is pretty minimal. I thought when I first heard it, no, this isn't fair, but I'm quite happy with it. And also got to remember that, like in our ward, quite a lot of people actually are buried in Invercargill or Gore, so it's never going to be totally you to pay. But I think that the contribution is a
fair and reasonable. Any other comments? You happy with that? You've got your feedback?
Yep.
Okay.
So then we're moving on to page 15 where we're talking about the district rate funding for Stewart Island, Rakiura, Wharfs and Jetties. So just in terms of context, what we're really looking for is a confirmation of the change to the policy, which was to include some general rate funding for this activity. If the councillors wanted to provide some clarity around the proportion of funding that they would be comfortable providing, that will then flow through into the long-term plan budget discussions. However, at the policy level, it's primarily around the fact that we're going to have some general rate funding. At the moment, the policy talks that's between 0 and 30%, and I think in the consultation document we talked about that would be up to 74 cents. Well, sorry, it was a bit more than that. The budgets have since changed since we did the consultation document, and when we revise the budgets, it's at 30%, it's 74 cents. I'm just trying to remember what we consulted on. It was $1.80 at that time. So.
What are you saying, 74 cents per property?
Yeah. So we've consulted on 30%. When we consulted, it was $1.80. And I think when I've redone the numbers.
So that's been reduced to 70.
Yeah. That was for the. I've got to remember what
Just
So
to provide
that's now down to 15%.
Yeah, just to provide some clarity around that, of course, after the meeting that we had, we went back and revised the budgets to push Golden Bay, the development of Golden Bay out into the third year.
Yep.
And so, of course, then the element of funding that we still required is around 39,000. The community board at the to meet the difference from user fees from their local rate, and we set the user fee the other day at the meeting on Monday, with the balance coming from that local rate for this year anyway. So council can still, we've still said to the community board that council may still make the decision to provide some funding for this year, but they may not either, so they've just resolved at the stage to meet that year. Golden Bay doesn't hit until the third year, and that's at the stage really where actually the rating, do you have that number?
Yeah, 108.
The rating would go up to $108.
Well, that's the amount of funding we needed.
$108,000 needed.
Yeah, and so that if we were to collect 30%, that would be $2 from the general rate, and the local rate. If the balance, if the fees were kept unchanged, the balance would come from the local rate, which would be
So I guess at this stage, this definitely is around the policy, so this is definitely around whether council wishes to provide district funding towards the operation of the jetties, either now and in the future. There is that separate discussion which you can talk about today, which is what is that level of funding that you're willing to provide for this year and in the future as well. But you don't have to do that decision right now. However, it would be beneficial for us to have that indication, because then we can proceed with the LTP numbers on that basis.
So I guess the first question is, well, it's around the general rate. At the moment, the policy allows for 0 to 30%. And does council have a preference in there for what percentage that might be? And we can, if we talk about that in terms of what was consulted on, it was up to $1.80 per property at 30%, but it's likely to be less than that for years 1 and 2, based on the fact that.
So you would see it escalating once Golden Bay Wharf comes into it year 3?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
And if we could tie that into today's discussion as well, that will give you the pathway forward to have that.
But the first decision is whether council is prepared to undertake a percentage at all.
Yep, as a
based on the submissions that you've heard and the discussions that you've had.
And so the points that are raised in page 15 on paragraph 49 outline, you know, most of the comments that we got in submissions was mixed.
Yep.
There was a feeling that it should come from the wharf users and the jetty users primarily, and then look at other options, which is effectively what we've been doing. And there was some concerns about the level of district funding, so different suggestions on what that should be limited to, 20%, or someone said 2%, in terms of establishing what the economic benefit or the wider benefit to Southland was. And I think I referred yesterday at the Finance and Insurance Committee, you know, we've done some policy work and thinking, and that's where we've got to, with somewhere between 0 and 30%. But it's your political discretion about where do you set that within that.
I'll ask Councillor Ford to make his comment.
The board are fully aware of the fact that the responsibility of funding is such, and they know that they have to be committed to that. But there was an appreciation that we could like some recreational contribution from the Greater Southland as such, to the people that come from far and wide.
As a general rate?
Yeah, that's the reason for the general rate. So, votes for far afield, we want to welcome them. So we'd like something to know.
Was did the board have a preference as to the percentage? Would it be from 0 to 30? Did it have a percentage in mind?
Nicole had to go at those things, and we were that many figures tossed around. It was taken with a track.
They didn't come to a firm?
No.
Okay. Yes?
If I spoke on their behalf, I would say 30%, because they're keeping an eye to the future of their costs.
Yeah. So I spoke.
We've got to change it, also there's demand for various groups coming and going.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yep. Councillor Keast, you had your hand up.
Thank you. So if we set it at, or left it at that it could be between 0 and 30, and we left it at 0 this time round, but it is there and it is signalled to everybody for an annual plan that we might put it in at a later date. Is that
correct?
Doable?
Yeah, underneath the current policy, that's what it allows you to do. That to review that percentage that you contribute as part of your budget setting process on an annual basis.
The problem with our current policy is it didn't allow any general rate funding.
So having it there is a good thing.
So the main question that you just need to answer is, are you prepared to contribute or change the policy to allow contributions from the district rate to go towards the operation? And you've heard some submissions coming back with a 52% majority for it, but once again it's on 29 submissions, so you need to take that in context.
It's put on new ground, and we're finding it effective as far as some of the charges are concerned.
Yeah, sure. Councillor Mike?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, from my perspective, it seems like it's pretty much split on yes, no, right funding, and a number of the ones who said yes were suggesting about 20% is the maximum.
No, there was no correlation between there might have been one or two that said oh, hang on, I need to go back and no, we didn't ask the question of them about the amount of percent. So we asked that question for the Te Anau Manapōuri Airport about what percentage it was. With this proposal, we didn't actually ask them what percentage they thought. It was just some submitters commented, one or two commented 2% or 2%.
I think there was a community board, one or two community boards suggested 20% would be the maximum.
Yeah, but that's something we can.
And that's part of the yes. So.
Yep.
Yes. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. Just a general question on rates. If we strike a rate per property and a person owes multiple titles but they are contiguous, is it just the one rate over, say, his 3 or 4 properties?
Generally
Per
speaking,
property.
yes. Yeah. What about separately used in Hampton Parks? Contiguous. Yeah, so there are other rates where there is a slightly different rule, but this is part of the general rate, so yeah, that
So
would be.
contiguous properties would attract one rate?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Councillor Menzies.
Thank you. Just a comment on the precedent that there sits, and although there are not many submissions, I think there's one submission said quite like our jetty had the same treatment. And I think with Stewart Island, one of the distinguishing points here was that we've got the new wharf added to the collection, and there doesn't seem to be an element of fairness that those residing in Stewart Island should pay for the maintenance and replacement of that wharf. So to my mind, that's what distinguished Stewart Island from the rest of the council area.
So when, just to reflect on that, when we prepared the draft policy, you remember we're quite explicit in there about the fact that this is really driven out of sustainability review. So we commissioned a review about services and sustainability and cost on Stewart Island. One of the recommendations out of that was around it is actually really difficult for that small rating base to fund these large infrastructure projects, and that was specifically recommended that we look at that as part of this review. So for me, the driving proportion isn't necessarily so much. There's an element of wider benefit to the district as well, of having visitors and them using these facilities and working throughout the district. But a large majority of the driver of this is around the impact that has on that small rating base, and also those commercial operators. So you'll see in the policy that when we drafted that, that's where we made that intervention, and that's part of, remember when we've talked about it, step 1 is about benefits and who benefits and to what degree. Step 2 is about adjusting for what's reasonable based on how that liability affects your community. And so we've got a bit of it up above in terms of thinking about benefit, but there's also quite an element of sustainability of services and ability of that community to afford those, and that's quite a large policy thinking piece in this
exactly.
proposal.
I think that's the essential difference here as well, and the work that's been done around Stewart Island. There's a lot of information and policy work sitting behind getting to this recommendation.
And at essence of it, most other community board or local areas have 3,000 ratepayers and they've got 500. Yeah.
Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Or 2 things. We talked about the impact per rating unit of $1.80, I think. But that's the operational expense, isn't it? Doesn't include capital expenses.
So what happens with capital, I should probably hand it over to the Chief Financial Officer, not being an accountant, would be that you get a loan out for that capital expense, and you've got to repay that loan, right, through principal repayments and interest repayments. It's that those payments then become part of your operational cost. Okay, so in essence, the funding will actually be contributing to the repayment of that capital. So it becomes operational in the repayment over time.
So your figure here, $1.80, includes the capital expenses by way of debt?
Yes. Yep.
And your second question?
My second one, just around the small rating base, how fair is that? We have to balance that up with people who never go to the island, don't have a boat. How fair is it for them to pay? So if we subsidise or over-subsidise across the district, then it removes the incentive for the Stewart Island community to think carefully about the level of service or the number of jetties that they need. So, yeah, it's almost like we're removing the incentive to be sustainable.
Yeah, and I think that's an issue that you've raised in previous meetings, and we've talked with the board about that concern, and we've talked about the fact that They do have a number of jetties on their island, and is it appropriate that they be continued forever, because there's being funded provided, and they're very conscious of that, and on their program is the consideration of what is needed. And in fact, I think the discussion occurred around in working with DOC in terms of their tracks and what the DOC's going to have they've got a process for reviewing what tracks they have and what they maintain and how they want to preserve that conservation estate. And actually there might be some changes to their process that might call into question as well whether some jetties are still needed. So they're conscious of trying to tie in with those discussions in that longer term planning, and I don't believe they take it, this is me speaking my personal opinion, for granted that they're getting general rate funding, so we'll just keep all the wharfs. That's on their program to think what do they need.
Something they're looking at.
And also at the time, they talk specifically around the time at which these jetties need to be replaced, or have significant expenditure spent on them, is the time at which they would really look hard at are they needed, that, in terms of their thinking about how they might program those reviews as well.
And those discussions came up run through the Stewart Island Jetties advisory group. It was very much around the DOC discussion, because they were part of that advisory group, and so that was where that came through. And you also heard from the chairman, John Spraggan, when he talked about the fact that that's part of the review. But your point is very valid, and it's the same point that we often think about for more than just that activity. It was very much one around the halls even will potentially form part of that, I would say. Yeah.
I do think council does have a role to play. You make decisions every year about what goes into what budget and how much general rate funding you're going to give. So you're part of that dialogue and process going forward.
Councillor Owen.
I just wonder if we've missed one aspect of this in terms of the public consultation. Just because we have referred to Stewart Island, Rahira wharfs and jetties as a whole, and I'm aware that some submitters may have perceived that to be the main wharf at which they would arrive, and perhaps could justify contributing towards that because that's the wharf that they would reasonably have access to if they were to visit Stewart Island and have that opportunity. But when you think about the other wharfs and jetties, perhaps those arguments might be a little harder to justify why there should be district-wide contribution to those. Just a complexity that there might be the public perception that district funding is going to go towards some of that main infrastructure that they would more easily use, and given that the principle on which we're justifying it is around critical transport use and access for recreation, a lot of people aren't necessarily going to use those other wharfs and jetties. So I think we may have missed something in the mix there, and public perceptions over district contributions might be different.
I do know the proposal information included the material around, in terms of an appendix around what were the wharfs and jetties. Whether people looked at that or understood that, I can't speak for that.
Councillor Menzies.
Thank you, Chair. Just, I guess in addition to Councillor Owen's comment, if a 30% contribution comes in district-wide, then it changes the mix around the consultation that occurs in the future around replacement, because it needs to come from the district as well as from the community board, reflecting that additional investment.
Yep. So I suppose the question to us, which Anne rightfully pointed out before, if there is support for that general rate for the wharfs, and I suppose that's what we want to make a comment.
Yeah, I just curious, we did discuss at one stage about water structures, which included parts other than Stewart Island. So are we including all that in that?
Technically, under the revenue and financing policy, we are setting a low band of 0 to 33% for that entire activity, because the RNFP talks about the whole activity, not just proportions. However, we've been quite specific in saying that our intention to trigger and use the general rate portion is only for Stewart Island for the reasons that we've outlined. If council then wanted to consider funding other water structures in a similar manner, then that can come back and we can do the same process of consulting over that specific change, or council can use its discretion to say that's appropriate. Your policy allows you to do that should you choose to. You can set it at 0, you can set it at 30. It's your discretion where you set it on that.
Yeah, but we don't have to set the percentage today. It's more about whether there is support for the general rate to support the wards.
Yeah.
So how do we pay for launching ramps and the likes that we have at various other parts of the region?
So currently they are funded by the local rate, so
Yeah.
whatever
Boat
the
rates.
relevant community board rate
Yeah,
is.
the boat ramps
This
are-
will also be funded by the community board rate. A portion will be funded, so you'll recall we consulted on that as part of this policy review.
So can I take it from the discussion around the table that in general there is support for a general rate for the support of the wards at Stuart Old? Yes? Okay, you got a direction there?
Do we want to talk about the proportion, or do you want to leave that for the LTP budget discussions?
We can discuss it now. You want to make a comment?
So I was just going to feel more comfortable.
With a percentage?
If
With a percentage?
brought
Yep.
down to 20 as being the top.
Is the max? People comfortable with the up to 20? Up to 20%? There you go.
Do you know what 20% is? 20% of what?
Now that's
So just to clarify, are you asking for the policy to be changed so that it says 0 to 20%?
Rather than 0 to 30.
I think we need a bit more flexibility.
I would have thought if you had 0 to 30, you do create that.
It can be 20.
It can be 20, it could be 25, it could be 15.
So I guess my recommendation would be we keep the policy between 0 and 30, and then if you're comfortable with that, either now or at the LTP budget session, we need to define what percentage that actually is going to be in this instance for this current.
If you have the policy at 0 to 30, we could still decide that we set it at 20. So you still got a buffer, or does it have to be at 20?
Just keep it at 0 to 30
Yep.
in your policy, and then we will come back as a separate paper.
Okay.
We'll prepare a
Right.
separate paper for you, and you can discuss
Yep,
that, and
okay.
it'll probably tie in with the next discussion that's going to
Okay,
come up
sounds
anyway.
good. Comfortable with that? Councillor Mills?
Just a question, does that mean that because it's between 0 and 30, there'll be a regular review of where that's set coming through the
So you
council
do that
process?
every
Is
annual
that
plan,
annually?
every annual plan, every LTP.
So it can be set differently, and the community need to understand. One year it might be 30%, the next year it might be 20.
Yep, and that's in line with Councillor Keith's comments
That's right.
earlier.
Yep. All right, we're comfortable with that? Okay, got a good start.
So CISA funding, so that proposal was around rating properties in the electricity distribution area for a contribution towards the cost of CISA. And that specifically was around where it's vacant land, that would be a half charge, and any properties that are built on or within the connected area that aren't, or that are built on, pretty much would pay a full charge proportion. And I think when we consulted it was $200 for the full charge and $100 for the half charge. Most of the submissions commented around looking either at alternative energy sources or subsidiary aspects of the operation of CISA. And there was some concern about the level of the general rate, the proposed rate at $200, particularly from one submitter on fixed income. So, yeah.
Councillor Ford, do you want to make an initial comment?
That we were in discussion with the board, and they were quite happy to pursue that as far as the putting it both in, and so we're going to put forward that we're creating our community. So
Greater
that's
support.
not unusual.
Yep, okay. Open up for any comments or questions? Yes, Councillor Owen?
I'd just like to know if this goes through at this point, at what point, if there's more people who missed out, local on Stewart Island who missed out in submitting on this, where their opportunity is to have a say. Is that through the LTP process?
Yeah, so what we do when because we're setting the policy, so we operationalise that in the LTP. There's a thing called a funding impact statement, and that sets out what the rates will be, and we'll have sample properties that will show what the rates will be. So you can work back from there, and we'll work with the comms team and the rating team to work out what information we need to provide clarity around that. But yeah, they'll...
As part of the LTP
Yeah.
consultation, people could comment on there if they wish.
Yeah. So again, it's the same thing. We've got 0 to, I can't remember what the amount was, that we're allowing to be funded from there. So it could be set at 0, it could be set at 5%.
Take it, there's support from that, so got your direction there, so we'll move on to the next one.
So similar along those lines was Te Anau Airport Manapori, so very similar to Stewart Island in terms of what was proposed in terms of having some general rate funding. The difference here was that the Fiordland Community Board had advised that they suggested that any funding not include what's needed to service the current loan for the airport. So the feedback from that was again mixed. So we had slightly fewer people support that at 43%, and the comments that were in support were really around that access for emergencies and connectivity to other areas, and also some support dependent on that us proving the economic upside of the airport for the whole district. And then there were a number of comments against the proposal from people who didn't feel like that benefit was there for everybody, similar to other issues that we've talked about today. And also a concern from, I think it was one of the community boards, around actually promotion of that as a tourist travelling option, what that might do to Southern Scenic Route and businesses and properties in those areas. So yeah, there's the range of those comments are indicated on page 58. So again, we're seeking, does council wish to provide some general rate funding? We'd signalled the same 0 to 30% band, and is that something that you would wish to go ahead with? And then we'll come back, I would imagine, as we're going to do with Stewart Island, around what the actual percentage in dollar value would be should you want to provide that funding.
Okay, so we'll open it up, and the first question is whether there's support for a general fund or not. I think that's the first key. So I'll just open it up. Councillor Byers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I think it's pretty clear that there's not the support for a general contribution to Te Anau Airport. The two arguments for the emergency factor, well, there's not many towns in South that have got an airport. We don't need them. We've got helicopters that can land on a lawn, so we don't need an airport for that. Prove the economic upside, well, we wouldn't be having this discussion if there was an economic upside that was working for that airport.
Yep, understand.
And as far as precedents go, I don't think this council wants to be seen to be effectively bailing out community initiatives. I think long term, that would be a good look for, as far as encouraging innovation in our communities, if the council seemed to be a backstop for ideas that didn't fly.
That's four.
Just to reinforce on that one, I think it's a regional asset, and certainly should be supporting it, and to make it work, we can do a whole lot better with it, and that's been said a time or two, but certainly a bit more information with it. I have no doubt we should be pursuing support for that, as far as I'm concerned.
Councillor Menzies?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure that people have seen, and I'm not sure I have, a full understanding of the business case kind of around this, and wonder about where there's opportunity to gain and provide more information around the why and the economic benefit. Given that with Stewart Island we'll be discussing that for a long time, and there's quite a bit of policy information sitting behind it. Whether that would be useful in going out to further consultation on it.
Okay, that's good. Any other? Councillor Harper?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you very much. I probably got it on a little bit what Councillor Menzies just finished saying, the information on why this airport is not operating efficiently and is a burden to the public. And our last community board meeting Monday night, the Tuatapere Community Board discussed this, and they are opposed to this idea. And one of the reasons was we would sooner have people driving through our town from the Southern Scenic Route and flying over the top, which was in total contrast to what we said here about a couple of meetings ago. But they also felt that under the present management structure, it was highly unlikely that any prominent airline would ever include mandatory yarn-out in their itinerary in the immediate future. And I also thought of paying a percentage towards Manapouri Airport was a bit like paying a percentage towards the Invercargill Airport. We don't pay anything towards Invercargill, so why should we pay anything towards Manapouri? So yes, that was their opinion, and mine is probably much the same.
Okay. Any other comments? Councillor Duncan?
Yeah. I mean, I would be more inclined to support this if we had a dedicated plan, a business plan on how we were going to improve the usage and the profitability of the airport. We've had it in our ownership for how long was it? 15, 20 years, and you know, apart from recreational flying and the odd flights to the Chatham Islands, it has not been a well-used asset, but potentially it could be, and I think that that's an opportunity that needs to be explored.
Councillor Scott?
Yeah, just further to that, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just think with the nature of the environment that we're in at the moment, especially with Fiordland as well, and with the Milford Opportunities Trust and Great South doing some work around the sort of tourism aspects, I think if we turned our back on this now, it's probably not the smartest move. But I think if we open it up like the walls, where we've got the ability to fund a sliding amount depending on the need, I think we should keep it in the mix based on potential, but definitely support a report or a business case being put forward towards its long-term viability. It's hard to make a full-on decision now with a lot of unknowns, but I would support keeping the option open.
Councillor Best?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm on the same side here. I would consider this because of the economic impact that Tiana area is struggling with at the moment, and also those other opportunities that are presenting, but it does need to be sorted out one way or the other. It either needs to fly or it needs to go. But yeah, I see this as an interim thing, and again it's that sliding scale that we have in the policy that allows us to maybe contribute, and I would think that we might be doing that to ease the burden on the local ratepayers, so that we can get our ducks in a row, plans in a row.
Councillor Duffy?
Oh, well, I support the concept of it, and I'm aware of the pressure on ratepayers in that area. They've been paying a lot towards this airport now for quite some time. We've been aware that perhaps the potential hasn't been realised for a whole lot of reasons of what the airport could do. We're in a very new environment now where things could go any direction really. So I'm supportive of the concept. I'm just concerned that we're sort of could be seen to be not listening to the majority of the submitters in this case. And I think for that reason we would need to be certain of the case that we've got for the support.
Yeah, good comments. Councillor Fraser?
Thank you very much along the same sort of lines. I think good to support it so that the policy enables us, but then perhaps sitting there and going, well, actually we're going to sit at the zero until we see some planning and see some more documents, and we actually, I think there's an opportunity for things to change, that can see some change, and that's a good thing to say, yes, we want to invest in, but we really need to see some of that come through. So yeah, that's my take. Support it in principle, policy, but set it at zero to start with until that other work is done.
So there's justification. Councillor Ruttenclaw?
I'm very supportive to what's been said here, and Darren as well. I do think we need to put some time frames around it as well, which are going forward within policy, and
Thank you. I'm unsure about what the original business case was around the airport and whether there was the intention to have some district funding contribution from there, but I'm just personally reluctant to commit to the wider Southland District ratepayers contributing to that without seeing that forward plan as others have reflected, because if it's fully utilised and utilised well and strategically, it can be a great asset, but at the moment it's not.
Okay, I'll just give a bit of context to it. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, the only other question I had is if there's no contribution, which kind of sense around the table, then how would the business case be funded to do that? Would that be within council?
Community board.
Yes, so
The community board would fund that. They would have to fund the business case.
yes, and that may need to be explored further because it's a bit higher. Thank you.
I mean, just to add a little bit of context on the history of that airport. When it was built, there was a grass airstrip, so-called airport, just out of Tiana, and part of the funding was going to be be sold for approximately $3 million. Of course, it's a downturn in the economy. I only received 1.5, so hence there was quite an additional expense on that community. And also at that time, there was an agreement that was locked in for 10 years for a developer that wanted to help develop that particular airport, build hangars and so on and so on. So we were, as a council and as a community board, quite hamstrung for at least 10 years because we didn't have the accessibility to it. So hence, it never developed as I think that everybody thought it could have or should have. So we're very mindful. I know that community board and the community itself are very mindful that that airport has not been developed as much as it possibly could have been. And that now needs to be tested. I'm not sure what the business case was when it was ever built. I wasn't here, so I can't really comment on that, and maybe we should just park that. We need to look forward. So I've taken from the comments around the room that there is support for a general rate based on one factor is it's set at 0 to 30 and currently at 0. And if there's ever going to be any movement, then there has to be a business case that's presented to council for council's consideration if there's going to be any financial contribution or not. Will that be fair? Is that a fair summary? Yeah. Okay. That's right.
Mr. Chair, you're talking about the development of the airport. There were roadways up there. I just wanted to get the background around the people wanting to put accommodation and hangars and around the airport. I heard someone call us a year or so ago. What was the background
Yep,
that they were
I'll give you.
sold?
Yep. I had a lot of involvement with some of those as well for a number of years, and there was a specific criteria as a type of hangars that you could build, and they were very specific. At that stage, you were not permitted to add accommodation to it. You can only build a hangar. You couldn't even add an additional bay to park your boat or your caravan. It was very restrictive. And you didn't have the ability to purchase the piece of land. You always had to lease it. Kiwis being Kiwis, we like to own things. And that was a real stumbling block for the development of that particular airport for hangars. Because, and it still is this way, that's something that we need to consider in the future. They don't have the ability to purchase a piece of land to build their hangar on it. The criteria for building hangars has now changed, where you can add on a accommodation, and the strict criteria for the design of the hangars has also changed. So now there is a greater flexibility for people to build not a high spec but a lower spec hangar, because that's all they would like to do. But there's still one issue, and that is the ability to purchase the piece of land to put the hangar on. Right? So those are the key factors as to why some of them. I know of at least 6 people that would have built hangars there if we had a different approach, but we were hamstrung because we had that agreement with that developer who tied up all that land, and we couldn't move on that.
So the hangar is only Tiana, like, or is it New Zealand wide?
No, Tiana, it was on that facility, on that site.
So you said they've now changed, they can build the accommodation, but
Yep.
they still can't own land.
That's correct, but that's something we're looking into, because I think that is probably the only way forward if people want to build hangars. I know there's 2 being built at the moment, and are prepared to lease it at this stage, but are really keen to buy the piece of land. And whether that is the right approach or not, that's still something that the community board needs to consider as an overall objective of that particular airport. So you've got the airport, you've got the development of, say, hangars, but then you also need to consider the development of the airport itself. You know, bringing people in there, bringing tourists in there. And I'm mindful of Councillor Harper's comments. You know, people fly over his backyard, but also take the views that people land into that airstrip. And if you can have hire cars, lease cars, you shoot down there and you go and do that walk in your backyard. So there's still the ability for people to fly in there and then sort of disperse throughout the southern district, but that's still to be developed. Yeah. Sorry? Yeah, you're right.
I don't think that there's any involvement with the conflict. Just explain it in a nutshell. Those 6 people that could have built those hangars there could have encouraged another section or another section or another section. But the way it is now, it's dead flat. Nothing much has happened, and until we get probably a development plan put in place, I'm not even sure that we could be going any further. But,
yeah, which reflects the discussions around the table here, is because we said 0 to 30, but it sits at 0 until such point we are comfortable with a business case or a proposal that's presented through council that could then make a decision. Councillor Douglas.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just cutting to the chase, whose decision is it to say whether the land could be bought or has to remain to be leased? Is that a Fiordland Community Board or is it council?
I think it's current policy, and I have to be corrected, whether it's that restricts the ability to sell council, because it's actually council land. So to sell council land, there is a process to go through, and whether that is achievable, question mark. As I said before, I don't have the answer on that, but that's something we would need to work our way through. But it's detracting people from building those sort of facilities.
And just supporting, Councillor Harper, I know several flyers that are interested in building hangars and accommodation if only they could get freehold title.
Exactly. Yep, I've got the same list.
So it's a stumbling block.
Well, no, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. They want to make an investment, capital investment, and you can see why. Councillor Menzies and then Mr McIntosh.
Yes, sorry, just a comment. It may be a menu of options around alternative leasehold agreements, not just one type, and purchase should all be considered as part of that business case.
I know the community board have had at least 2 or 3 sessions on looking at what we could do with the airport and minimal progress. Anyway, you want to make a comment?
Mr Chair, look, I do have a bit of perspective on the situation at the airport at Manapuri. And I'd just like to make the observation that successive community boards have made the best decisions they could under the circumstances, also respecting the views of the community at the time. I can't remember whether it was a consent condition or exactly what the restriction was on non-aviation commercial use of the hangars, but that was related to a very strong community desire that there wasn't a new industrial park being developed in around the airport, which detracted from Te Anau itself. So it's really easy, well not easy, it's tempting to look back from here and say, how did we get here? But I can tell you that the successive community boards made the best decisions they could, and that's kind of where we get to.
All right. So Nicole, you got a steer there.
Yep.
You're comfortable with that. So all right, we'll move on to the next subject. Thank you for that discussion.
So
Very good.
it's just the 2 items left. So one was just around funding of wastewater unchanged. So there wasn't really any feedback about that. So unless council's had a change of heart between now and then, I'd imagine they're comfortable.
Yep.
Okay. And the last one was around the waste management rate being funded through the district-wide rate. So we did get a couple of comments in relation to that, mainly in the way the activities actually run. We did have that late submission from Federated Farmers which specifically talked about that concern, which I've addressed to say that we will be maintaining those proportions from the general rate and the UAGC when we amalgamate them. Any other questions from councillors on those items?
Any questions on that? Seems not.
There were a couple of other items as well that were just sort of various comments that are mentioned on page 18, just about not increasing rates, just about the consultation process, about the landfill site at Colic Bay, and also Federated Farmers talked about the voting rate review. So I'm just noting those and not taking any action on those unless council has anything they'd like me to do in that regard.
No?
So that brings it to a close. Yep.
Okay, so what we'll do is, thank you for that participation, it's good. I'll move that we go into public.
So that you adjourning the item and we'll come back to
Oh, yeah, sure. We'll adjourn this particular item until we come back into the public forum post public excluded. Yep.
Now you can do the
I'll move that we go into public excluded. Do I have a second for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Menzies. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against.